They were auctioning a widow and her baby. The cowboy rode up late and said, "I'll take them." The sun had barely risen over the dusty town when Mary woke to the sound of wind, whistling through the cracks in the wooden walls of her small cabin. She held her baby close, feeling the soft warmth of his tiny body against hers. Samuel, just a few months old, had the same soft brown hair his father had, and Mary often found herself staring at him, both in awe and in despair. Her husband, James, had been gone for 3 weeks now, taken by a sudden illness that left her alone in the world with no one to turn to. She had cried every night, but the tears had not brought him back. All she had left now was Samuel, her small bundle of life in a world that often felt cruel and unforgiving. Mary dressed quickly in the faded clothes she had left. They were old and patched, but they were all she had. She tied a shawl around her shoulders to protect herself from the morning chill and stepped outside. The town was quiet, with only a few townspeople moving about their business. The wooden sidewalks creaked under her worn boots as she walked toward the small market in the town square. Mary needed food and supplies for herself and Samuel, but the money she had left from James' small savings was almost gone. As she walked, she passed the general store, the blacksmith, and the stable. People nodded to her politely, but she could see the pity in their eyes. Some whispered to each other, and she knew they talked about her husband's death and her struggles. She lowered her head and quickened her pace. She could not face their pity today. All she wanted was to find a way to keep Samuel fed and safe. She reached the market, hoping to trade a few things James had left behind. But as she approached, she noticed a group of men standing together, laughing and talking in low voices. One of them, the town's richest landowner, had a stern look on his face. Mary recognized him immediately. He had always been a cruel man, someone who enjoyed showing power over those weaker than him. Her heart sank when she realized he was looking directly at her. "Mary," he called out, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "I hear your husband left you with some debts unpaid. That is unfortunate. I suppose you have no way to pay." Mary's stomach twisted. She did not know how he had found out, but there was no point in denying it. I will work it off," she said softly, hoping for mercy. "I can help around your land or do any work you need. Please, I just want to take care of my baby." The man laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Work? With a baby in your arms? I'm afraid it's not that simple. Debts must be paid, Mary. And sometimes people must make sacrifices for the town to survive." He let the words hang in the air, their meaning clear and cruel. Mary's heart raced. She knew what he meant. She had heard rumors, terrible stories about women in her situation. She had hoped, prayed even, that it would never come to this, but now it seemed inevitable. She could feel Samuel stirring in her arms, sensing her fear. She held him tighter, whispering soft words to calm him, but her own heart was breaking. By midday, Mary found herself standing in the town square, surrounded by a small crowd that had gathered to see what would happen. The auctioneer, a thin man with a sharp voice, stood at the center, his clipboard in hand. "We will begin," he announced. "Mary and her baby Samuel are to be auctioned to the highest bidder. Anyone wishing to claim them may place their bids now." Mary froze. She could not believe what she was hearing. Auctioned, her and her baby. It sounded impossible, but the faces around her were serious, some curious, others cruel. The thought that she and her child could be treated as property made her stomach turn. She tried to step back, but the auctioneer's eyes held her in place. She had nowhere to run. The first man stepped forward, his hat in his hand. He was a rough-looking man with a sneer. "I'll give $10, he said, looking at her and then at Samuel. "I can take them off your hands and make use of the woman." Mary's heart raced with fear. She could feel Samuel's tiny hands clinging to her shawl. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she had no strength to resist. The townspeople murmured among themselves, some nodding, others shaking their heads. The auctioneer nodded at the man and then looked for the next bid. Another man stepped forward, offering a higher sum. "I'll give 20, he said, his voice loud as if to show he had power. Mary felt tears prick at her eyes. This was not a fair world. She had lost her husband, her home, and now she was about to lose her freedom and her baby. She whispered to Samuel, "Stay close to me, my little one. I will not let them take you." As the bids went higher, Mary's hope began to fade. She had no idea who would win this cruel auction, no idea what her fate would be. The thought of being separated from her child was unbearable. She hugged Samuel tightly, trying to block out the whispers, the laughter, and the cold eyes that regarded her as nothing more than an object. Some townspeople shook their heads, unable to believe what was happening. One elderly woman muttered under her breath, "How can they do this to a widow and her baby? It is cruel, inhuman." Mary heard the words and felt a small spark of comfort. Not everyone had forgotten kindness, even in a world that often seemed heartless. The auction continued. Mary felt weak, her knees trembling. She thought about James, about the life they had dreamed of together, and her heart ached. She could not understand how life had become so unfair, how the people she had trusted in this town could watch without intervening. She held Samuel closer, whispering words of love and protection, even though her own heart was filled with fear. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Each new bid sent a wave of dread through her. She saw men grinning, thinking they had power over her, and women whispering, unable to help. Mary prayed silently, asking for some miracle, some unexpected kindness to save them. She had nothing left but hope, and hope seemed fragile in the face of such cruelty. Just as she began to despair completely, a distant sound caught her attention. The rhythmic pounding of hooves against the dusty road grew louder. Heads turned and a hush fell over the crowd. Mary looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, trying to see who was coming. Through the dust and heat, a figure appeared. A man on horseback, riding steadily toward the square. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a long coat, and boots that had seen many miles of travel. His presence alone seemed to command respect, and Mary felt her heart leap with a fragile sense of hope. The man slowed as he entered the square, his eyes scanning the crowd. He noticed the auctioneer, the raised hands, and finally Mary and Samuel. He dismounted smoothly, tying his horse nearby, and walked toward them with a calm, deliberate pace. The townspeople parted, some in curiosity, others in surprise. Mary clutched Samuel, unsure of what to expect. She had dreamed of someone intervening, of someone saving them, but it had always seemed impossible. Now here he was, a stranger, yet he carried an aura of kindness and strength that gave her a glimmer of hope. The auctioneer cleared his throat, uncertain. "And who are you, sir?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. The man smiled faintly, a quiet confidence in his eyes. "I've come to help," he said simply. "I'll take them." Mary could hardly believe her ears. He meant to save them, to give them a chance at life and safety. She felt tears welling in her eyes, and Samuel stirred, sensing her emotion. The townspeople murmured in shock. Some whispered disbelief, others admiration. The man's calm words had changed everything in a single moment. Mary felt a weight lift from her shoulders, though she did not yet understand the full extent of what had just happened. For the first time in weeks, she dared to imagine a future where she and Samuel might be safe, where she might not be alone in the world. She looked at the man, unsure of what to say, but grateful beyond words. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads at the strange turn of events, others quietly admiring the courage it had taken for someone to stand against cruelty. Mary held Samuel close, feeling a warmth she had not felt in a long time. Her heart was still heavy with grief for James, but now it was mixed with a fragile, precious hope. The man looked at her gently. "You're safe now," he said. "I will make sure of it." Mary nodded, unable to speak, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a sense of relief. The future was uncertain, yes, but at least they would face it together. no longer at the mercy of those who had shown them only cruelty. She felt Samuel stir against her chest, his tiny hand reaching toward her face, and she whispered softly, "We are not alone anymore, little one. Someone will protect us." The man tipped his hat slightly, as if acknowledging her silent gratitude, and then began to lead them away from the square. Mary followed, holding Samuel tightly, her heart still racing but now filled with hope. The dusty streets of the town seemed less harsh, the wind less cruel, and the sun a little warmer. Perhaps, she thought, life could still hold kindness, even in the midst of sorrow. And so, with a stranger's kindness shining like a beacon in the dark, Mary and Samuel stepped toward a future they could not yet imagine, but a future that, for the first time in many weeks, felt possible. The town square buzzed with activity, though it was a strange, uneasy energy. The auction had begun, and Mary stood in the center, holding Samuel close. The baby's tiny hands clutched her shawl, his soft brown eyes wide and innocent, unaware of the danger surrounding him. Mary's heart raced as she tried to steady herself, but fear gripped her tightly. Each word from the auctioneer felt like a hammer striking her chest, reminding her of the cruelty she faced. The auctioneer, a thin, wiry man with sharp eyes and a voice that could carry across the square, began calling out bids. "Who will start the bidding for Mary and her baby?" His voice was loud, almost casual, as if the proceedings were a normal, everyday matter. But to Mary it was anything but normal. She felt naked, exposed, and powerless. A rough man in a dusty hat stepped forward first. His boots scraped against the wooden planks as he approached. "I'll give $10, he said, looking at Mary as if she were nothing more than an object to be claimed. Mary's stomach churned at his words. She could feel Samuel's small body stiffen against hers. She whispered softly, "Don't worry, my love. Stay close to me." The auctioneer nodded, taking the bid. Then another man stepped forward, a cruel smile curling on his lips. "I'll give 20, he said, his eyes cold. The crowd murmured, some in excitement, others in discomfort. Mary felt the sting of tears, but she refused to let them fall. She could not show weakness, not now, not when Samuel needed her. With each new bid, Mary's heart sank further. She saw men laughing, joking, and some even arguing over her and Samuel as though they were pieces of property. The thought was unbearable. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out, a way to protect her baby from this cruel fate. But the truth was simple. She had no money, no power, and no one to help her. As the bidding continued, Mary noticed a few townspeople watching quietly. Some looked uncomfortable, shaking their heads, muttering to themselves. She caught the gaze of an elderly woman in the crowd. Their eyes met for a moment, and the woman's face showed pity and sadness. Mary felt a flicker of comfort knowing that not everyone in this town had forgotten kindness. The auctioneer's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Do I hear $30? A man in a worn vest raised his hand. "30, he shouted. His voice carried across the square. The crowd reacted with murmurs and whispers, some in shock, others in grim amusement. Mary held Samuel tighter, feeling her hope slipping further with each bid. Mary's thoughts drifted to her husband, James. She remembered the nights they spent dreaming of a life together, imagining a small home with a garden and enough food to eat. She had never imagined that life could turn so cruelly, that the world could demand such a price for survival. Her chest ached with grief, but she refused to give up. She whispered to Samuel, "I will not let them take you. We will find a way." The next bidder, a man with a rough beard and calloused hands, raised his voice. $40, the crowd gasped at the high bid. Mary felt her knees weaken. $40, money she could never hope to match. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the horror of it all, but she could not escape. Every sound, every glance reminded her of the danger looming over them. Some of the crowd began to whisper among themselves. "How can they do this to a woman and her baby?" one voice said. "It's wrong, it's cruel." Mary heard the words and felt a spark of hope. Maybe not everyone was heartless. Maybe someone would intervene, someone who could save them from this nightmare. The auctioneer paused for a moment, looking over the crowd. $50, a man called out suddenly, his voice strong. Mary's heart sank even further. $50, it was an unimaginable sum for her, and she knew she could not possibly offer that. She clutched Samuel, feeling his tiny heartbeat against hers. He was all she had left, and she could not bear the thought of losing him. Mary's eyes scanned the crowd desperately, searching for anyone who might help. But the faces she saw were indifferent or cruel. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. Tears threatened to spill, but she wiped them away quickly. She could not cry, not now. Samuel needed her to be strong, even if she felt weak. The bidding continued, each new offer pushing Mary closer to hopelessness. She felt trapped, a small bird caught in a storm, unable to fly away. Samuel stirred in her arms, sensing her fear. She whispered to him softly, "Hold on, my little one. We will survive this. Somehow we will survive." Just as the bidding seemed to reach a peak, a sudden noise caught everyone's attention. The rhythmic pounding of hooves echoed through the square, growing louder with each passing second. Heads turned, and a hush fell over the crowd. Mary looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, trying to see who was approaching. Through the swirling dust, a figure appeared. A man on horseback, riding steadily toward the square. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat that flapped slightly in the wind. His presence commanded attention. The townspeople stopped their bidding and whispered among themselves, wondering who this stranger might be. Mary felt a flicker of hope, though she did not fully understand why. There was something in the man's steady ride, the way he carried himself, that seemed different. He was not like the others. He did not look cruel, nor did he seem interested in the money. He seemed kind. The man dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to a post near the edge of the square. He walked toward Mary and Samuel, his steps calm and deliberate. The crowd parted, some in curiosity, others in surprise. Mary clutched Samuel tighter, unsure of what to expect. She had prayed for a miracle, and now perhaps it had come. The auctioneer cleared his throat, trying to maintain control. "And who are you, sir?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. The man looked at Mary and then at Samuel, his eyes gentle. "I've come to help," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority. "I'll take them." The crowd gasped. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some could not believe what they had heard. Others whispered admiration. The man's words had changed everything in a single moment. Mary felt her chest tighten with relief. Could it really be true? Could someone actually save them? The auctioneer looked at the man, unsure how to respond. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man nodded. "I am serious. I will give what is fair, but more importantly, I will ensure they are safe." Mary felt tears sting her eyes. Relief, gratitude, and disbelief swirled inside her. She had thought all hope was lost, that the world had no place for a widow and her baby. And now, in the middle of a cruel auction, someone had stepped forward to protect them. The townspeople watched silently as the man paid the auctioneer. There was no greed in his movements, no hint of selfishness. He did what needed to be done, not for money, not for power, but because it was right. Mary held Samuel, feeling his small body relax against hers, sensing her relief. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly admiring the stranger's courage. Mary followed him, her heart still racing but now filled with hope. For the first time in weeks, she dared to imagine a future where she and Samuel might be safe. The man looked at Mary gently. "You are safe now," he said. "We will make sure of it." Mary nodded, unable to speak. Words failed her in the face of such kindness. She felt Samuel stir in her arms, his tiny hand reaching toward her face. She whispered softly, "We are not alone anymore, little one. Someone will protect us." As they left the town square, the sun climbed higher in the sky. The dust of the day hung in the air, but it no longer felt suffocating. Mary felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, replaced by a fragile, precious hope. She did not yet know what the future held, but she knew they would face it together. For the first time since James' death, Mary dared to smile. It was small and tentative, but it was there. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness could shine through. And with Samuel safe in her arms, she felt the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The stranger, the cowboy who had appeared like a hero from nowhere, walked beside her, calm and steady. His presence gave her confidence she had not felt in weeks. Perhaps life could still hold goodness, even in a world that had shown so much cruelty. Perhaps there were people willing to stand up and do what was right. Mary clutched Samuel, feeling his warmth and life, and whispered again, "We are safe now, my little one, safe and loved. We will find our way." And so, as the sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets, Mary and Samuel stepped into a new chapter of their lives, one filled with hope, protection, and the promise that even in the harshest times, kindness could arrive when least expected. The cowboy walked slowly through the dusty town square, his boots crunching on the wooden planks. Mary clutched Samuel tightly, her heart still racing from the terror of the auction. The crowd had begun to disperse, whispering and murmuring among themselves. Some were shocked, some curious, and some clearly impressed by the stranger who had appeared just in time to save them. Mary's eyes followed him, unsure who he was, yet sensing that he meant no harm. "Come with me," the cowboy said gently, his voice calm and steady. There was no hint of arrogance or cruelty, only quiet authority and kindness. Mary hesitated for a moment, glancing at Samuel, who stirred in her arms. She knew she had no other choice. Whoever he was, he had intervened when no one else would. As they walked toward the outskirts of the town, Mary stole a glance at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, but there was a softness in his eyes that reassured her. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "To my ranch," he replied simply. "It's not far and it's safe there. You and your baby will be protected." Mary nodded, unsure what to say. Words felt inadequate for the relief and gratitude that swelled in her heart. She had never imagined anyone would step forward to save her and Samuel, yet here he was, leading them away from danger with nothing but kindness and purpose. The town faded behind them as they moved along a narrow dirt road, the sun beating down from above. Mary adjusted the shawl around Samuel, shielding him from the heat. The baby cooed softly, sensing the tension leaving his mother's body. Mary took a deep breath, allowing herself to feel the first stirrings of hope in weeks. After a short ride, they arrived at the cowboy's ranch. It was small but sturdy, surrounded by wide fields and a few scattered trees. Horses grazed quietly, and the smell of hay and earth filled the air. The ranch was simple, but it radiated safety and calm. Mary felt a strange mix of awe and relief. Here at last was a place where they could breathe, where Samuel could grow without fear. The cowboy led them inside the small house. The interior was modest, with a single fireplace, a table, and a few chairs. It was clean, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and leather. Mary set Samuel down gently on a blanket he had prepared. He looked up at her with wide eyes, then smiled. She felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the relief of seeing him safe. "You can rest here," the cowboy said. "I'll get some food ready. You must be tired and your baby needs care." Mary nodded, grateful but unsure how to respond. She watched as he moved about the kitchen, lighting a small stove and preparing a simple meal. There was something comforting in the way he worked, methodical, calm, and purposeful. It was the first time in weeks that Mary felt safe enough to relax, even a little. As the meal cooked, Mary looked around the room. There were signs of life here, simple but meaningful. A few tools leaned against the wall and a stack of blankets lay neatly on a shelf. The cowboy noticed her gaze and smiled faintly. "I keep things simple," he said. "Life is easier when it's organized. You'll see it's not much, but it's home." Mary smiled softly. "It's more than I had," she admitted. "More than I could have hoped for." The cowboy nodded, not in arrogance but with quiet understanding. "Everyone deserves a place where they can feel safe," he said. "You and your baby will have that here. No one will hurt you." Mary's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of fear or sorrow. They were tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope blooming in her heart. Samuel babbled happily on the blanket, stretching his tiny arms, and Mary laughed softly. The sound felt strange to her own ears, but it was freeing. Over the next few days, life at the ranch settled into a gentle rhythm. Mary learned the small routines of the home, helped with simple chores, and began to regain a sense of control over her life. The cowboy, whose name was Jack, treated her with respect and kindness, never overstepping boundaries, but always offering help and guidance. He taught her to care for Samuel safely and encouraged her to rest whenever she needed it. Mary discovered a strength within herself she had not known existed. She found that she could cook, clean, and care for Samuel even when she felt exhausted. Jack's presence was reassuring, but he never did the work for her. Instead, he gave her confidence that she could handle life again, slowly building her independence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Mary sat outside with Samuel in her lap. The baby cooed and kicked, enjoying the warmth of the fading sun. Jack worked nearby, tending to the horses, his movements steady and calm. Mary watched him, realizing how much she had come to rely on his quiet strength, not just for protection but for guidance and comfort. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence. Jack looked up and smiled faintly. "For what?" he asked. "For saving us," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Jack shrugged as if it were nothing, but Mary could see the seriousness in his eyes. "Everyone deserves a chance," he said simply. "I couldn't let you face that alone." Mary nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She knew she owed him more than she could ever repay, but she also knew that kindness like this could not be measured in debt. It was a gift, freely given, and she accepted it with all her heart. Days turned into weeks, and Mary began to settle into life at the ranch. Samuel grew stronger and healthier under her care, and Jack's presence provided a sense of security she had not felt since James' death. They worked together to tend the small fields, feed the animals, and maintain the home. Mary learned to ride a horse slowly, starting with short rides around the ranch, feeling the wind on her face and a freedom she had not known existed. Through it all, Jack remained a steady presence, never demanding, never intrusive. He offered guidance when needed, but allowed Mary to find her own strength. Slowly, Mary's confidence grew. She began to see a future for herself and Samuel that was filled not just with safety, but with possibility. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel asleep in his small crib nearby, Mary spoke softly. "I used to think the world was only cruel," she said. "But now I see there is kindness too. I see people who will help when no one else will." Jack nodded, gazing into the fire. "There is always good in the world," he said. "Even when it seems lost, you just have to find it." Mary smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. For the first time since James' death, she felt at peace. Samuel was safe. She was learning to care for herself again, and there was a man who had shown her the meaning of courage and kindness. Life was far from perfect, but it was good enough to begin again. As the night deepened, Mary tucked Samuel into bed and sat beside him, watching him sleep. She whispered softly, "We are safe now, my little one, safe and loved, and no matter what comes, we will face it together." Jack joined her silently, sitting in the chair nearby. There was no need for words. They both understood the gravity of what had happened, and the quiet promise of hope that filled the small room. And so, in the quiet of the night, Mary felt the first stirrings of a new life, one where fear no longer ruled, where hope had returned, and where love and kindness could guide them through the uncertain days ahead. The world outside might still be harsh and unpredictable, but inside this small ranch, Mary and Samuel had found a sanctuary. Jack, the cowboy who had arrived like an answer to prayer, remained a silent guardian, a symbol of courage, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, help could come when least expected. Together, they began to build a new life, one step at a time, grounded in trust, compassion, and the simple joys of survival and care. Mary knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Samuel giggled softly in his sleep, and she felt a surge of gratitude. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs to shape. And with Jack's guidance and protection, Mary was determined to give Samuel a life filled with safety, love, and hope. The days at the ranch passed gently, with the rising and setting of the sun marking the rhythm of life. Mary had grown stronger and more confident with each passing day. She had learned to care for Samuel, to cook simple meals, and to tend to the small fields and animals around the ranch. Life was still challenging, but the fear that had once shadowed every moment had begun to lift. For the first time since James' death, Mary felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Samuel grew quickly, his laughter echoing through the small house and across the fields. Mary watched him explore the ranch, his tiny feet pattering across the soft grass, his bright eyes full of curiosity and wonder. Each new milestone filled her with joy. She remembered how fragile he had been when she first held him in the auction square, and she marveled at how strong and full of life he had become. Every day was a reminder that despite the cruelty they had endured, life could still be beautiful. Jack remained a steady presence, working quietly alongside Mary. He repaired fences, tended to the horses, and helped with the harvest, never overstepping but always offering guidance. Sometimes he would sit beside Mary as she worked, sharing stories of his travels, tales of other towns, and lessons about surviving in a world that was often unforgiving. Mary listened, absorbing the wisdom in his words while feeling a deep gratitude for his care and kindness. One morning, Mary noticed the way Jack interacted with Samuel. He was gentle, patient, and playful, lifting the baby in his strong arms and spinning him in circles until the little boy squealed with delight. Mary's heart swelled at the sight. She had never expected someone to love them both with such sincerity, not as a duty, but as a choice. She realized that Jack's presence had transformed their lives in ways she could not have imagined. As weeks turned into months, Mary found herself learning new skills every day. She learned how to ride the horse fully, how to milk the cows, and how to tend the small garden that provided vegetables for their meals. Jack was always nearby, offering advice when needed but allowing her to discover her own strength. Mary felt herself growing, not just in ability, but in confidence and self-respect. She realized that the fear that had once dominated her life could be replaced by courage and hope. One evening, after a long day of work, Mary and Jack sat on the porch of the small house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Samuel was asleep inside, and the air was warm with the fading light of day. Mary leaned back against the wooden railing, feeling the smooth warmth of the sun on her skin. She thought of the auction, of the terror she had felt, and of the moment Jack had arrived to save them. Her heart filled with gratitude and quiet awe. "I can't believe how much has changed," she said softly, speaking more to herself than to Jack. Jack looked at her with a gentle smile. "You've changed too," he said. "You're stronger now. You've survived more than most could, and you've done it with grace." Mary felt a lump rise in her throat. She had never thought of herself as strong. For so long, she had only seen her weakness, her inability to protect Samuel or herself. But now, in the calm of the evening, she realized she had survived, she had grown, and she had found a place of safety and love. Samuel stirred in his sleep inside the house, and Mary smiled, feeling a warm glow of happiness. She had feared losing him, feared the cruelty of the world, but now he was safe, healthy, and loved. She leaned her head back against the railing and closed her eyes, savoring the peace of the moment. Over time, the bond between Mary and Jack deepened. They spoke little of the past, of the auction, or of the tragedies that had brought them together, but their actions spoke volumes. Jack's kindness, patience, and protection created a foundation for trust, while Mary's resilience, care, and love for Samuel built a home filled with warmth and laughter. Together, they created a life rooted not in fear, but in respect, compassion, and hope. One afternoon, as Mary worked in the garden, Jack approached with Samuel in his arms. The baby reached out his tiny hands toward Mary, giggling happily. Jack knelt beside her, handing Samuel over gently. "He's growing so fast," he said with a soft laugh. "Soon he'll be running through these fields, exploring everything." Mary took Samuel in her arms, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against hers. "He's already exploring," she said with a smile, brushing back a lock of his soft hair. "And he's learning from both of us. He will grow up knowing love, not fear." Jack nodded, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding. "And he will always have a home where he is safe and cared for," he said. "No one will ever take that from him." The seasons changed, and life at the ranch continued peacefully. Mary found joy in the small moments: the soft cooing of Samuel in the morning, the golden light of sunset across the fields, the steady presence of Jack nearby. She realized that happiness did not always come in grand gestures, but in quiet, consistent acts of care and love. Mary often reflected on the cruel world they had escaped. She remembered the auction, the fear, and the hopelessness that had once consumed her. But she also remembered Jack's arrival, the kindness he had shown, and the way he had restored hope in their lives. That memory remained with her as a reminder that even in the darkest times, good people could bring light, and that courage and compassion could change lives. As Samuel grew older, Mary and Jack worked together to teach him the values they held dear: honesty, kindness, and resilience. They taught him to respect others, to care for animals, and to appreciate the beauty of the world around him. They laughed together, played together, and shared stories under the vast sky, filling their small home with warmth and joy. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Mary tucked Samuel into bed and watched him drift into sleep. She thought of the journey they had taken from fear, despair, and loss to safety, hope, and love. Her heart was full, her spirit renewed. She whispered softly, "We have come so far, little one, and we will keep going together." Jack joined her quietly, standing at the doorway and watching the peaceful scene. He smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "You've done well, Mary," he said. "You've built a life from nothing, and you've given Samuel everything he needs. You've done more than I could have imagined." Mary turned to him, her eyes shining. "We did it together," she said. "You showed us the way and we followed, and now we have a life we can be proud of." Jack nodded, his expression serious but warm. "Yes," he said. "And it will continue to grow. You and Samuel in this home will keep building it day by day with care, courage, and love." Mary felt a deep sense of peace. The world outside might still hold challenges, but within this small ranch they had found safety, love, and hope. Samuel would grow knowing he was cherished. Mary would continue to grow stronger, and Jack would remain a steady guide and protector. They had created a family, not by blood alone, but by trust, kindness, and shared resilience. As the night deepened, Mary sat outside on the porch, gazing at the stars. Samuel slept soundly inside, and the gentle breeze carried the faint scent of the fields and hay. She thought of the auction, the cruelty, and the fear she had endured. And she thought of the cowboy who had arrived like an answer to her prayers. Her heart was full of gratitude and hope. "Life can be cruel," she whispered to herself, "but it can also be kind, and we have found that kindness." Jack joined her on the porch, sitting quietly beside her. They watched the stars together in comfortable silence, a symbol of the peace they had found. The world might be unpredictable, but for now they were safe together and ready for whatever came next. Mary knew that challenges would come, that life would not always be easy. But she also knew that they had the strength to face them, the courage to continue, and the love to guide them. Samuel would grow up surrounded by care, protection, and hope. And she herself had discovered a strength she had never imagined she possessed. With Jack by her side and Samuel in her heart, Mary felt a sense of completeness she had thought impossible. They had survived the darkness, escaped cruelty, and found light. And as the stars shone brightly above the quiet ranch, Mary knew that their journey was just beginning, a journey filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.